My name is Sarah, and I'll be presenting my paper which looks at structural change in the Philippines. This table shows that the agricultural sector between the period 1980 and 2007 has declined, whereas the services sector, in terms of both output and employment, has exhibited strong and positive growth within that same period. And what makes the Philippines quite an interesting case study is that unlike its Southeast Asian neighbors, and unlike the East Asian miracle economies of China, Japan, and South Korea, who have all achieved rapid economic growth through industrialization, the Philippines, on the other hand, has uniquely experienced deindustrialization and instead moved directly towards a services-led economy. And before discussing policies, I'd like to briefly introduce the IT/BPO industry, which includes activities such as transcription, animation, and call center services. And that's because my essay argues that the growth of this industry in particular, as reflected in Figure 1, has been fundamental in underpinning the upwards trend in services that we observe in the Philippines. So the first set of policies I'd like to discuss relate to the liberalization of the telecommunications industry. Telecommunications form a vital support industry for IT/BPO services. However, prior to its liberalization, the industry suffered from severe inefficiencies, and that was largely due to being under the control of a government monopoly. However, this all changed in 1993 when a series of policies were implemented. My essay highlights Executive Orders 59 and 109, and essentially what these policies aimed to do was open up the sector to new players and increase levels of competition. Table 2 summarizes the success of these policies, but the main results I highlight are that 9 new firms entered the market, each a joint venture with a foreign company, FDI levels increased by around 25 times, and overall these policies ensured the development of strong telecommunications infrastructure. And my essay also looks at supporting empirical evidence, which finds that the expansion of telecommunications was positively and significantly associated with the export of services. Moving on to industrial policies, in other words, investment incentives, these are primarily managed by the Philippine Board of Investments, who each year decide which industries to include in its investment priority plan. And in the year 2000, ICT was amongst those chosen for that year's investment priority plan, which meant that IT/BPO firms could qualify for investment incentives, the main one being these tax holidays which can last for up to 8 years, and overall this had the effect of drawing in further FDI into the industry. And we can see this reflected in Figure 2. Starting in the year 2000, there has been a rapid and significant increase in the number of IT/BPO investment projects coinciding with the industry's inclusion within the investment priority plan. And again, my essay references supporting empirical evidence, which finds that similar tax incentives used in other developing countries had a positive effect on FDI inflows. Finally, I'll go on to discuss education policy. One of the Philippines' principal strengths is that it has a large, English-speaking and educated labor force. So English is widely spoken in the country because it's a former US colony, but also because there have been a number of policies implemented to preserve that English proficiency amongst Filipino students, one example being the 1974 bilingual education policy. And then similarly, the government offers a number of vocational courses, which are done in partnership with representatives from the industry, and overall that ensures that graduates are equipped with the relevant skills and qualifications for roles within the IT/BPO industry. And we can see in Figure 3 the success of educational policies in channeling labour towards the services sector. We can see that the majority of graduates do go on to work within the services sector, with IT/BPO being the most popular industry within that. And then again, my essay references supporting empirical evidence. So that leads us to the conclusion of my presentation. We've looked at 3 different areas of policy, the first relating to the liberalization of the telecommunications industry and how that helped establish a strong telecommunications base, which is critical for IT/BPO activities. Then we discussed the role of industrial policy and investment incentives in drawing in further FDI into the industry. And finally, education policy and how the government has supported its labor force in acquiring the relevant skills for roles within the industry. However, I'd like to end my presentation by acknowledging that the expansion in the services industry that we observe in the Philippines also reflects an increase in relatively less productive areas of service, for example, tourism, vehicle repair, and retail trade. And this means that the Philippines still has a long way to go if it wishes to achieve a similar level of economic development comparable to that of other East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.